Natalie looked at her husband and couldn't understand when he had become like this. Maybe he had been like that. It was just that she hadn't noticed it before. However, it didn't matter now. "Steve, if we buy a flat, we buy it in half. Otherwise, I take my share of the money. It's not right to collect the money for the flat. You're mercantile. What difference does it make to who the flat is registered to? We're a family, and counting who invested how much is out of line. I repeat, we're a family." "Well, if there's no difference, why?" Steve looked at her confused. "Well, there's no difference, and I want so much." "Well, no, I'm the master of the house, always the master of the man." Steve was furious. He didn't understand what was going on. Natalie always agreed to everything he said. He wasn't ready, unprepared, because he was sure she'd agree here, too. "Steve, stop it. We've been in this country for a long time. Equality, but we either make the flat for two or we don't." He didn't make the last argument, but it's more expensive. "You realize we'll have to save money for a while. It's no big deal. You won't be drinking beer in the evening for a month." He almost fell over. How dare she say those words to him? For 10 years, she had acquiesced silently. And then her voice snapped. He immediately hurried off somewhere. He had nothing else to do. He wanted very much to have a nice big flat, but even more, he wanted to be its sole owner. But maybe he would think of something later. The main thing was to get Natalie to come back to his place. God forbid she starts asking where he disappeared to in the evenings. Why had his salary become small? It hadn't become small. It had just increased since they'd met. But Natalie knew that. At home, I always cleaned laundry and ironed food, fresh and varied. When it is necessary, she never has a headache. Only bored she is some gray, Natalie exulted. She did not even think that she would succeed. The woman is beautifully put. And the fact that her husband returns at night when he works until 6, and how much he does not twist, and that he thinks she is a fool, she somehow got used to that. Steve, her husband, that they are always near, always together, and recently thought, and if not, if not, if not, if not, if not, if Steve will take and go to another heart whimpered at the mere thought of it. And of course, she shared her worries with her friend Lisa. "If it happens, how will I live on?" Lisa snorted. "That's right. To live, not to exist, as you are doing now, Steve." "Who is Steve? Who's Steve? Is it sickening to see you flattering him? He gave you flowers last time. But flowers are an expense. You know, we want to buy a new flat. Flowers are an expense, and dinners for Steve, like in a restaurant, are neat traits. Natalie, you don't understand anything. Your Steve loves only himself and will never make sacrifices for you. You're an idiot. You work 2 jobs, earn 3 times more than him, and think you owe him something. Where did you lose yourself? Remember who you used to be? Remember the guys who chased after you? Paul was one of them. When you got married, it was like you were wiped off the face of the earth. Stop it. I came to you for advice, and it's like you're taking my advice. He's the only one I've got. Re-educate your husband. Make him realize that you not only have responsibilities to your family, but rights in general. Kind of a meme. If he gets fed up with you, he'll just kick you out of your new flat. You'll probably sign everything over to him too. But he's the owner. Lisa grabbed the picture, who apparently really was an idiot going about her life. Natalie didn't have time to hide his smirk, and he saw her. Why are you smiling? Are you telling me that you alone would buy a house like that? Yes, you wouldn't even think of having something else. Natalie was horribly offended but kept silent. Natalie made big eyes. Natalie, what kind of a child is she now? Don't talk about age and the fact that women give birth later. You see, we have empty walls, and everything we need, we bought and furnished. She only sighed. She only sighed. 2 years passed, and the flat became unrecognizable. Natalie took a part-time job to buy everything necessary, but Steve began to disappear again. Only now he came in the morning. She realized that something was coming that would completely change her life, and this event did not take long to happen. One day, leaning back on the table after dinner, "I'm Natalie. I'm leaving you. I'm fed up with a mouse like you." "I'm not leaving you. I'd like him to move out of the flat. I've got a young wife on the way, and I need space. You don't care where you live alone, probably just because she's ready." Not a muscle flinched in Natalie's face. "Of course, I'm not going to hold you by force, but I'm not going to move out. It's my flat, so I'm going to live here." His eyes got round at the insolence. "Actually, half of the flat is mine by deed. That's exactly half. You don't have to move out. You should listen to your husband. I don't need an established man hanging around rented flats." Natalie's up. "Steve, I'm not going to talk about this anymore. This conversation is over. I'll put your things on the sofa. I hope you can pack them yourself." She left, and he remained sitting with his mouth open. He thought a little about how his girlfriend would feel about this turn of events and hurried after Natalie. The woman shrugged her shoulders. "That's fine. I'm not forbidding you." Steve even stomped his foot. "You will regret it very much, and I promise you that I will sell my half of the flat to some non-American. Then you will sing differently." Natalie was sure that he was just intimidating her, although, in her heart, of course, doubted. The divorce went in the best traditions of the film genre. Steve even decided to share the dishes and all this with someone. The young father also expressed his dissatisfaction, and Natalie had to listen to him because she dragged Steve everywhere with her. When everything was finally over, Natalie was happy. She sighed. But as it turned out, not for long. A couple of months later, Steve appeared. "Well, you haven't thought about vacating the flat yet?" "No, why should I think about it, but it's my own fault. I've found a buyer for my half, and tomorrow I'll sell it. Goodbye. I hope you won't regret it." He ran out the door. Natalie slumped in her chair. God, how much harm she had done to him. Why did Steve, with whom they had lived together for so many years, make things as bad as possible for her? Why did Steve, with whom they had lived together for so many years, make things as bad as possible for her? After all, even during the divorce, she had not plotted any mischief against him. As soon as she opened the door to the flat 3 days later, Natalie realized that there was someone in the flat, and she felt sick at once. It meant that Steve had kept his promise. Natalie smelled something cooking in the kitchen and took a few steps forward. Standing with his back to her was a tall, sturdy, thank God, a russet-haired man who was staring thoughtfully at a frying pan holding salt in his hands. Jumping up and dropping the salt, he quickly picked up the jar and turned to her. "Good evening. Excuse me. I decided to do a little housekeeping. Well, to get acquainted, to talk. So it's you who's trying for me." The man finally smiled. "But yes. Stephen told me that you're not very friendly." Natalie froze for a long time, stared at the man, and kept silent. He even got nervous and looked around him. "Something's wrong. You just don't worry. I work shifts. I don't want to come to my mom's house for a month. My sister is there with the baby, and so I haven't been there for 3 months. "Paul," he froze, looking at her, and then even came closer and aghast. "Natalie, it can't be. I would never have recognized you." She grinned merrily that she had aged so much. He shook his head thoughtfully. "Yes, no, she hadn't aged. Your eyes became as if to explain indifferently, and only now she couldn't stand it. She stood crying. Paul sat her down on the sofa, gave her water, and hugged her. "Well, what are you? What happened?" "You never cried either. All the girls cried, but you didn't." She was talking. She was talking. Paul laid out the meat and poured the wine. She was silent, and Paul sat silent for a while, and then he said, "So from this day on, you must forget everything that happened to you before. Now you will have a completely different life." He suddenly stuttered. "Listen, when is your holiday?" Natalie shrugged her shoulders. "Yes, I haven't been on holiday for 5 years." So tomorrow morning you will go and write an application, and we will go on holiday together. We'll decide that later. But the main thing is that while you're at work, I'll buy everything you need in a week, and you'll be tanned and with a sparkle in your eyes. She has such a coat. God, how I want such a coat. Steve wrinkled his nose, and Angela's demands were such that the money from the sale of half of the flat melted like smoke, and you could not tell her about it. She would immediately start to sabotage. But you're a man. Music. He had already seen the price of such a coat, but it was darker. Please, it's the latest chic. At that moment, the woman turned to her companion and said something to him with a smile. He tilted his head, then took her and gently under her elbow, and they turned. Steve froze, and Angela was silent. The woman was pregnant, and it was two. It was Natalie. She also recognized her ex, and the man to whom he had sold half of the flat also recognized him and immediately came between his wife and Steve. Stanislav grinned unkindly. And you were more cunning than I thought. You decided to lie under the tenant to avoid losing the flat. But you didn't have time to say anything because you were knocked down by a powerful fist. Paul leaned over him, who had never even looked at my wife in his life. And if you try to say anything else, I'll break your neck, understood? Steve nodded small. Paul straightened up again, took the frightened Natalie under his elbow, and they went towards the exit. Steve turned with force to Angela. Did you see? No, you saw. Without me, you're not a man. Without me, you're worse than a woman. And you don't have any money, as I realized, so I'm not interested in you anymore. What else could you be interested in? Anna stepped over his feet and walked towards the exit of the shopping hall. Steve gave her his hand, but then lowered it and sat silently on the floor. If you like the story, I hope for your support by pressing the thumbs up button. Thank you, and have a nice day. And have,